Hello, my name is Apollinaria. I am a professional spiritual guide and facilitator. I've got 15 plus years of experience doing inner work using somatic and psychological and mystical modalities. And today I want to talk to you about the ego, which has had some hilariously bad PR in the West, in Western spirituality. So I remember very distinctly when I was having my first spiritual awakening, I was doing a lot of yoga, I was doing a lot of meditation, I was immersing myself in spiritual literature, I was reading everything I can get my hands on. I was really taking in the culture that was available to me. And during that time, it was extremely common to hear and to talk around and to feel this sentiment of kill the ego, destroy the ego, overcome the ego, you know? There was this almost hateful relationship with the ego that was the complete cultural norm. I mean, at one point, I have this very distinct memory. I was at a music festival, and there's this thing that people carry around at music festivals. They're called totems, if you haven't been. A totem is literally just a really long stick with something fun on top of it so that your festival group doesn't get lost and can find you and whatever. But someone had this totem at this music festival, which literally was just a big stick with a sign that said ego, and it was just crossed out in red. No ego, kill the ego, destroy the ego. I mean, it's still around, it's still baked into the culture, but it was inescapable. It was everywhere. And for decades, the basic idea was kill the ego, transcend the ego, become one with all that is. Understand that you are one with all that is. And yes, listen, if you are on anything resembling a serious spiritual path, you will experience states of being that are beyond the ego, that are this felt experiential state of oneness with all that is, where any distinction feels completely nonsensical, you know? You actually feel completely interwoven with the fabric of all of reality. And it is an incredible and an incredibly potent state of being. And it is a spiritual peak state, right? It is a state that you experience, whether it's through medicines or some sort of ecstatic dance or I don't know, even just a singular moment of incredible alignment, in nature or whatever. You can access it in many ways. But the point is, when you do access it, it's meant to be a spiritual peak state. It's meant to be something that you experience, you ingest, you really feel, you let it permeate your being, and then you come back down into a day-to-day reality. And you do your best to integrate the awareness, the clarity, the wisdom that you received from that peak. You do your best to integrate it into your day-to-day life. You know, it's not a goalpost for your day-to-day existence and your state of being. These spiritual peak states, they're places for you to visit and then return from. And then again, integrate. However, as people were increasingly experiencing these spiritual peak states, something got mixed up in spiritual culture. People are historically really good at finding something to blame, to punish, or to disown. In order to solve their problems, right? That's just kind of what people do best. So for a long time, after people had these spiritually peak experiences, they got to work doing what people do best and noticing that in their, transcendent states, there was a distinct lack of self-awareness, a distinct lack of self-concept, a distinct lack of ego. They decided, oh, that's the problem. So we should destroy that and then everything will be fine. We should disown that and then everything will be fine. And, enough confident people decided that that was the problem, that it kind of just like became baked into Western spiritual culture. And I am here today to argue that that might not have been the best or most effective takeaway. And I'm here to make a case for a more healthy and better defined relationship with the ego. I am here to argue that the ego is literally just a part of your psychological architecture, and so long as you are a human being living in human society, you will have an ego as like literally just a part of your psychological being. And that ego can be like maybe well-adjusted or maladjusted, but where that ego is maladjusted and like, I don't know, acting inappropriately or whatever, that doesn't make, that's not like an indicator that there's something wrong with your ego. That's an indicator that there are problems to solve that your ego is pointing you towards, basically. If your ego is maladjusted or getting in the way of you living like a beautiful, flowing, interconnected life, then that's just an invitation. That's like the way that like a hiking trail will have like a trailhead pointing you towards it. That's just your ego being a like trailhead pointing you towards the path that your healing journey needs to take, right? That your inner work needs to take. So let's take a second to actually define the ego and what it is I'm talking about when I say ego. So your ego is functionally just your self-understanding in relation to others, right? It is inherently a social function. It's how you understand yourself in relation to other people. A well-adjusted ego generally has a grounded, coherent, well-adjusted enough understanding of itself in relation to other people that allows it to navigate relatively easily and successfully through social situations, right? Now, social reality is inherently subjective, of course. This is not like a specific science, but a well-adjusted ego generally understands itself in relation to other people well enough to navigate the world, not in a way that like shies away from friction, but in a way that isn't excessively full of friction and doesn't do like, generally damage to yourself or the people around you, right? It's well-adjusted ego is marked by navigating social situations and the people around you and the social world around you effectively. Conversely, a maladjusted ego can, think too little of itself or too much of itself. It can take up too little space in social situations, or it can take up too much space in social situations. In any case, it strains the social fabric in some way or another, in a way which inhibits a smooth and flowing communion and flow and co-creation between yourself and the people around you, right? It acts as functionally like a knot, a like blockage in social functioning. So your ego is, much like a physical body part, that when it's functional allows you to navigate your physical world well. Your ego is just a functional part of your psyche that when it is functioning well, allows you to navigate social world and social connection, interpersonal connection well. When your ego is maladjusted and you think too little or too much of yourself or whatever in relation to people in a way that is dysfunctional, whether you think too little or too much of yourself, and I'll let you in on a little secret, those are actually two sides of the exact same trauma coin. But whichever one it is, whichever one you see yourself doing, that's not like itself a problem, right? That's just your ego showing you that there is a problem somewhere in your psyche. And it's trauma. Guess what? It's always trauma. Whatever trauma you have in you that like most likely sounds something along the lines of like I'm not worthy, or I'm unlovable, or I don't deserve things, or whatever. Whatever trauma that sounds like that in you is manifesting as this like ego maladjustment. And I'll put up a link right over here to a video I made about shadow work, which does go into more detail about what it means to work with those parts of yourself and heal those parts of yourself. But in any case, for now, just keep in mind that when you are working with your maladjusted ego, it's not a problem, and even the thing it's pointing to is not actually a problem. It's literally just the place in you that needs attention and healing and love. So there's nothing wrong with your ego. There's nothing to kill and to destroy and to overcome. You don't need to mutilate yourself. Your ego will actually die on its own, right? I'm sure you've probably heard of the term ego death if you are interested in content like this. Ego death is a term that refers to a psychological phenomenon when your sense of self is completely erased. And then it does return and it grows in some way or changes in some way. A version of you, a version of your self-concept dies, is destroyed, and then it regrows, changed in some way, maybe completely. If it's a full ego death, probably in a major way. But ego death happens all the time, right? You can have like completely holistic major ego deaths with things such as like medicine ceremonies, or things like really sudden and intense life changes and like dramatic life changes. Your entire concept of like yourself and even like life can suddenly shift, and then a whole new one has to be forged to take its place, right? And you can like grow quite a lot in processes like this. But you can have subtle ego deaths as well, and they happen through, or like, you have medium-sized ego deaths too, where like a version of your life, like not your entire life changes, but like a version of your life, some part of your life dramatically changes, maybe a relationship or something like that. And you have to like develop that like new version of yourself and self-concept. Or you can have a minor ego death, like just like a turn of events or a realization or something makes something about your self-concept like need to like change and die and be reborn or whatever, Some version of yourself gets composted and then turned into fuel for new ideas, new concepts, new self understandings, right? This is a completely normal part of spiritual growth. You don't need to kill your ego. You don't need to force this process of growth. On the contrary, you just need to take good care of yourself, Ego death happens. Your self-concept is torn open and then like has to reform, much like a muscle does when it's developing and gaining strength. Your muscles, when you're building strength, when you're building muscle, they will experience all these like tears, all these breakages, in order to grow back stronger and deeper and like in a new shape. Your ego goes through the same process as it grows and develops throughout your life. You don't need to force it, you don't need to push it. Similar to working with your muscles, you just need to do it in a like intelligent way that's working with you rather than against you. You need to, be kind with yourself and the process and get the rest that you need when you need rest. Be a hospitable and effective space for this ego death and ego growing and strengthening process to happen. It's not something that you need to force. And if this analogy stands, and if this analogy works for you, of like the ego as a muscle that grows, then if your ego is extremely maladjusted, then the analogy then to your psyche is that you're, it's like being really physically unhealthy, and maybe to become strong and well-adjusted and capable of navigating world, being like both strong and flexible enough to navigate world, getting to that process might not be immediate. If you have a very like poorly adjusted ego or psyche, then you're going to need to do the equivalent of physical therapy with your inner work. You're going to need to grow and develop in like small and gentle ways until you can start growing and developing in stronger and more intense and deeper ways, right? You can start lifting more weights, inner work wise, right? You can take on more inner work weight. In any case though, like the ego death is just a small part of your spiritual maturing process. It's not something for you to work against. It's not something for you to force. It's just something for you to do well and to, again, do with plenty of compassion and ease for yourself. And there's no need to rush anything or force anything. That's the same as like going to the gym and going way too hard, way too fast, and then doing nothing but hurting yourself. There's no need to hurt yourself. That's not how actual spiritual maturing, that's not how actual muscle building, that's not how actual growth happens. So with all of that said, I do also think that there is a level of spiritual maturity that does take you beyond the ego. But it is not a transcendence of the ego, okay? I go into it in this video, I'll link here, about peaceful non-attachment. It's like a proper introduction to peaceful non-attachment. But getting to that state, and I talk about it in that video, is not about transcending or overcoming the ego. It's just about evolving into a version of awareness that includes but is not limited to the ego, right? And not beholden to the ego. Like wanting to kill your ego and the sentiment of killing your ego is the same as like wanting to kill your teenage self so you can become your adult self. That's not how it works. Like, when you grow into an adult version of yourself, there is still that teenage version of you that's still like a part of you. It's like a smaller layer in the onioning layers of your psyche, You still like emo music or, indie bands or whatever it is that you liked when you were a teenager. But it's just not like that big or encompassing of a part of your life anymore, It's just like a smaller part of your whole, of your psychological whole, right? Becoming the path of spiritual maturing, the seeker's way is not about like disowning and mutilating and dismembering parts of yourself. It is about remembering more and more of yourself and becoming only increasingly whole and harmonious in your inner world. And that very much includes your ego. So, hopefully this video kind of cleared things up, gave you like a better and more integrated concept of the ego than the ones that have been floating around spiritual spaces. And if the video did resonate, do feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned in. And I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.